Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And welcome to this session on accelerating shipping decarbonization and the global energy transition. Generously hosted by Yara and especially Svein Tore's team, who has done all the prep work for this session. Welcome, sir. My name is Johannah Christensen. I'm the CEO of the Global Maritime Forum, and I will be moderating this session for the next hour or so that we have together. So, for shipping to decarbonize by 2050, zero-emission fuels and zero-emission vessels will need to be deployed at scale within this decade. And there is so much to be done in the next few years to get us on track to meet this goal or even a more ambitious goals that I know that some of those on the stage have already set. So maybe I could just offer a little bit of context on shipping decarbonization to start us off. First of all, decarbonizing international shipping is going to be fairly difficult. It's quite hard. There's a reason it's counted amongst the hard-to-abate sectors. First of all, it can't easily be electrified, certainly not on long-distance routes, and it takes quite a bit of fuel to power the sector. Some of you who are in the audience today know just how much. That's about 80,000 vessels that trade globally, and in the vicinity of 300 million tons of fuel oil that's being used presently. Second, it's a diverse and highly fragmented and disaggregated sector, which makes it harder than other sectors that are just more consolidated or that are simpler, like the power sector or the like. So shipping is done in different ways with different business models, different operational models all around the world, and so that's quite complex. It's also very fragmented, so whilst there's a small concentration, especially in the container sectors, of vessels under same ownership, there's a very, very long tail of small operators working globally, and that just makes it harder to align around fuel pathways and new business models and the like. And then I would say most importantly, we have neither zero-emission vessels or zero-emission fuels available on a commercial basis today. And that means that, in order to transition to zero-emission shipping at an international level, we face the chicken and egg dilemma that many other sectors are facing as well, whereby, the investors in the vessels are not ready to invest in zero-emission ships when the fuel isn't available, and vice versa, the investors in the production of the zero-emission fuels aren't ready to invest in that until there's a clarity on the availability of the zero-emission ships. Hopefully some of our speakers here today can touch a bit on the progress that's been made even just in the past year or so that should hopefully help us. So it's against this backdrop that in 2019, the Global Maritime Forum, my organization, the World Economic Forum, and Friends of Ocean Action worked together with some of the companies represented here today to establish the Getting to Zero Coalition. It now counts well over 200 companies from the full value chain, including shipping, energy, finance, cargo interests, alongside international institutions, governments, NGOs, and the like. The mission of the Getting to Zero Coalition is to have zero-emission vessels operating on the deep seas by 2030 on a commercial basis. And that's the difficult part, the end bit, the commercial basis. But the work of the Getting to Zero Coalition has already identified several no-regrets levers that we see that can be pulled now as we face down this urgent transition. And I hope we can touch on some of those levers in our discussion today. So first of all, to ensure that new vessels are built in a way that future-proofs them. So that with the flexibility to retrofit, with multiple fuel optionality, so that we can navigate this transition without stranding a boatload of assets. We've also looked at a lever that's establishing green shipping corridors, which can create better conditions for accelerated action, especially around the fuel availability and the production of the fuel and the bunkering and making it available for the ships that trade on specific trade routes. And then finally, to be a leader in green demand, whether that's by committing to offtake zero-emission fuel or chartering zero-emission vessels, as I know some are already beginning to do. So these are some of the topics that I hope to touch on with this panel. If I may introduce our esteemed speakers. First of all, we have to my left, your right, Jeremy Weir, who is the chairman and CEO of the Trafigura Group. We have Svein Holsether, who is president and CEO of Yara International. We have Mr. Takeshi Hashimoto, president and CEO of Mitsui O.S.K. lines. And finally, Andrew Forrest, chairman and founder of the Fortescue Metals Group, and in this particular context, also relevant, Fortescue Future Industries. So I guess while some progress is already being made in the International Maritime Organization, the regulator for the industry in terms of putting a price or a penalty on emissions, we have a long way to go before global policy becomes a driver. But I don't think that should be an excuse for us to sit on our hands and wait for that to happen. So what I hope that each of you would share with us today is what are some of the steps that can be taken in the interim, in the short term, to put us on track to achieve our long-term goals. And if I may start with you, Svein, that would be great.
Sure, and thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. For me, right now, the demand is really the key uncertainty, but in many ways, that's also the key opportunity in order to accelerate this, because we already know how to produce a zero-emission fuel. That's not rocket science. The technology is already there. We know how to transport the fuel as well. We know how to store it. We've done that for decades, about 100 years, then to support a fertilizer company, but this is also something that could be applicable for transporting hydrogen in the shape of green ammonia. But the key uncertainty here is when is demand going to come for this product, and how much will there be when it starts to pick up? And that's what's making the decisions to invest so difficult, because we're talking about multi-billion-dollar investment with rather long lead times, and to jump into that without the certainty that there will be a market or a contract to meet that is incredibly challenging. So what is going to come first? Is it the supply of the product, or is it the demand for it? And I've come to the conclusion, at least on our behalf, that this has to happen in parallel. We have to do both things at the same time. But concrete actions are needed, both on the regulatory side, to increase the certainty, to help to reduce the risk in moving ahead. That could be grants to de-risk investments, or contracts for difference that would allow to create the revenue streams around the defined period to make it possible. We really do believe that the market is moving in the right direction, but we need more certainty around this, and this is something that we can do when actual contracts are signed. From our side, what we're doing in order to move ahead is that we're separating the whole ammonia business into a new company called Yara Clean Ammonia, to take the assets that have really been built over decades. We have 17 production units, we have 11 ammonia ships, we have 18 ammonia terminals across the world. So we're ready to start up, and also on the bunkering side, we've signed an agreement with Asan Fuel Solutions for bunkering and distribution of ammonia in the Scandinavian countries, and we've already started with our demonstration plant in Norway. So we will have product available in 2023. So for the customers out there, we will be ready to start supplying in 2023. And one of the beauties with ammonia is that there's ample availability already, and then we can transition gradually towards making that green as well. So there are really no excuses not to get started, also on the shipping side, to start converting ships and starting to move into zero emissions. So I'm, in a way, both encouraged, but I'm also frustrated. Encouraged by what I see as the opportunity, frustrated because this should have happened yesterday. Thanks.
Thank you, Svein. You mentioned early on in your comments this idea of, or this notion of, the certainty of the offtake for the green ammonia that you're producing. Hashimoto-san, you have already made quite detailed plans for the transition of your fleet to zero-emission fuels. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about the timelines that you foresee and what some of the barriers that you perceive to be, and what the opportunities are to overcome them?
Thank you, Johannah. Yes, last year we set up our long-term environmental plan then to achieve the net zero until 2050. As of today, we are operating about 800 vessels all over the world, and most of them are still utilizing the fuel as oil as a fuel, and so it's a very long way to go for us. Then, for the time being, that we are concentrating that replacement of existing vessel to LNG burning the vessel, because it can reduce the emission level to 25%, and that it will certainly the plus. But of course, that the LNG will not be the final answer for us. So that during the transitional period, we really want to reduce that absolute volume by utilizing that the various kind of the alternative fuels, not only LNG but methanol, LPG, or biodiesel, etc. However, considering about long-term future, we strongly believe that ammonia can be the most the possible solution. So during the 2020s, we really want to construct at least one or two ammonia-bound vessels to provide the ocean-going services, and then after that, we will gradually expand our fleet size. That is a plan. So that still out of 800 vessels, perhaps that if our plan is quite successful, we will have around 100 LNG burning vessels, and another 100 ammonia, and the net zero waste the fleet, and then other type of the technical solution will be also required. For example, the wind power and solar power, etc. However, the challenge facing for us is that to replace 100, 200 vessels will require the huge finance investment for us, and then we are quite determined to find the various solutions to enable us to such kind of the financing arrangement, and also the technical, quite many technical challenges. But I'm relatively optimistic about the technical side of the ammonia bunkering. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. And of course, the financing is a key barrier to overcome. Jeremy, your company plays a big role in helping overcome some of those financing barriers, in the sense that as a charter of very large amounts of vessels around the world, with long-term offtake agreements or long-term chartering agreements, you are able to catalyze some of that. Could you talk a little bit more about what you see as opportunities in the near term? And
yeah, let me just start off by sort of saying what we at Trafigura are doing, particularly to try and to address some of the issues on the shipping industry and what we're planning to do. First of all, from ammonia production point of view, we're investing in a green ammonia facility in the Sarda region of Norway. We're doing that with this will be a 600 tonne per day facility, initially in production by 2027, and specifically for the bunkering business and the shipping industry. This is in conjunction with Hydrogen and the Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners Group. We're doing and we should be getting to financial decision by the end of, or middle to the end of 2023, with construction in 2024. So that's on the drawing boards. We've also got some other projects in ammonia production in Australia as well. We've also committed to 6 ammonia fueled ships to operate these by 2030. This only represents roughly about 20% of our current owned fleet, and we'd look to try and expand that on a forward-looking basis. We are also working and helping sponsor with MAN engines a two-stroke marine engine, ammonia marine engine, which will be available in 2025. So it's both on the supply side, on the consumption side. So they're the things we're doing. I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned before with respect to the IMO. I do think 2022 is an important year, and it's a year we can actually make some real decisions and take some real actions. And we think to create a level playing field, it's very important that the IMO does impose some sort of carbon tax to make sure we have got a level playing field amongst the entire shipping industry.
Couldn't agree more. And perhaps we can invite Secretary Kerry to talk to that at a later stage. Before we do, Andrew.
Thank you. Look, I really appreciate this opportunity, and Secretary Kerry, fantastic to have you here with us, mate. You've been a global champion. Thank you very much for your endorsement the other night of the Global Green Hydrogen Standard. That's a massive breakthrough, John, and your endorsement has ricocheted around the world. It's been picked up by Spain, it's been picked up by companies all over the world, because we now know what that miracle molecule looks like. And that molecule is capable of making steel green, cement green, shipping green, fertilizer green. It's actually an overall solution. I love the fact that my friend here got an electrical ship going for small trips, but what we need for massive trips and what the IMO needs is a fuel which we can make in huge scale from that miracle molecule, which is, of course, green hydrogen. And I did call and I did challenge the IMO back in COP26 and in their meeting in London for the IMO to really toughen up their targets, to pick up what Jeremy's just said. It is the world's most polluting industry. We're all forced into being heavy polluters, and we need not. And the IMO is concerned about protecting its members, and I get that. But its members are now screaming out for leadership. And that leadership is there. Fortescue has contracted with Germany to deliver 5 million tonnes of green hydrogen later this decade, starting 2024-25. That's equivalent, ladies and gentlemen, to about 35 million tonnes of green ammonia. We know it can happen. Technically, there are certainly challenges, but absolutely none which are surmountable. You know, there is nothing we can't do. Everyone in this room know that we can turn shipping green. Fortescue won't have a boring tanker going at one speed, 8 knots or 7 knots or whatever knots, going for 3 weeks and then back again. It's going to have a highly stressed, operating heavy, challenging environment, operating ship with zero emissions for the first time this year. It's going to have a diesel engine in the back because we're not going to risk our crew. But in the front, it's got a green ammonia operating engine. We're retrofitting it as we speak. We're putting it in the water to satisfy regulators it's safe. November, December. So we know this can happen. It takes real will. It takes the IMO to lead, governments to level the playing field with a carbon tax, so we all know where we stand. We all know actually that on cost we're burdening the world with, we're actually going to help alleviate ourselves through a carbon tax. But further than that, sovereign and private port owners around the world, and I've spoken to port owners, both private and state, all over the world, we have a responsibility too. It's up to us to signal as soon as that ship sails and commissions well and operates well with green ammonia as its fuel, sending out no pollution, no destruction of our children's future. When that ship sails and we take out the technical risk, now we have a production risk. Now we can call on Yara, now we can call on others, we can call on FFI. Get off your tail, get into production, bring down those costs. Because we know this for sure. the oil and gas cost is a very mature technology. We know equally for sure that making hydrogen, the miracle molecule which underlines the world's march out of global warming, that technology, that cost is rapidly falling. I can speak to you about cracking the water molecule in solar panels, taking it off at atmospheric temperature and pressure, pressurizing it into high pressurized gas or even liquid with a chemical process. I can talk to you about zero moving parts in the generators. I can talk to you about huge wind towers with 80% less steel, 80% less concrete. All these technologies are happening not in oil and gas, not in coal, not in fossil fuel. They're happening in hydrogen. And hydrogen makes green ammonia and can make it at massive scale. So my call, and I believe I'm joined by many people, my call is when that ship sails, while I did challenge the industry at COP26 in London for a 2040 carbon neutral shipping industry, I now say this: when that ship sails, commissions, and operates successfully, let's all as a shipping industry. We have 100 ships on the water. We're one of the biggest in the world by weight. Carbon follows the tons. Let's all call for a 24 carbon neutrality for the global shipping industry, and let's have ports signal, you better be on board, ship owners, because our ports are going to welcome those ships first, and maybe not any others who can't go carbon neutral because we care. We're showing the leadership and the understanding of science which the future generations and ours need today.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, and I think you make a really great point about the action that can be taken by individual countries, by whether it's states in the US, whether it's port cities and the like. So there's lots of opportunities for action outside of the global regulator as well. I think that's a good jumping off point to invite US Special Envoy, Presidential Envoy, John Kerry, to the stage. Oops. Thank you. So, Secretary Kerry, you have lent your voice, your considerable voice and influence to shipping decarbonization for the past years, and we're so grateful for it. You have been supporting or advocating for high ambition at the IMO, supporting intergovernmental efforts, such as some of the ones that Andrew speaks to, such as the Clydebank Declaration, Mission Innovation Shipping Mission, and especially you've also stepped into encouraging demand commitments through the First Movers Coalition. Could I ask you to share what you think needs to be done in the short term, this year already, maybe even ahead of COP27 later this year in Egypt, to put us on track to meet those very ambitious goals that Andrew lays out?
Well, Johannah, thank you very, very much. Privileged to join everybody here and this fantastic panel. Every one of the folks sitting up here have been remarkable leaders in this direction. And Jeremy, thank you, and Svein, and Hashimoto-san. Andrew, you've been just heroic in this, and he was one of the first people to join in one of the things I'll chat about in a moment if I can. But look, I'm going to bore some people over the next couple of days while I'm here, because I'm going to keep repeating a reality that we have to deal with. And if Davos doesn't stop and really grapple with it, we're just in huge, huge trouble. And that's basically where we're headed. And we have to stop, and I sort of put it in this framework. 20 countries equal 80% of all emissions. 20 countries. And if those 20 countries don't get their act together, the planet can't. And right now, we have 65% of global GDP on track to hold the Earth's temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. But that means, obviously, we have 35% that isn't. And in every sector, you can find 35, 40, 50% that isn't doing what we need to be doing. So we need a real confrontation with reality here. And I'm so delighted that every person on this panel has stepped forward. Their companies have stepped forward. They are stepping forward. Green ammonia, first ship, that will be with green ammonia, not just ammonia, but green ammonia, up and down the value chain. 5% of the ships that are, say, 5% of the fuel is going to be zero emissions, and 10% of the goods being carried on those ships are going to be goods that are being shipped on zero emission ships. So you join the two components of decision making, if you will, that makes this happen. But we can't do this without a couple of things. First of all, let me talk about two things that are really important to this, to achieving this. The first is the First Movers Coalition itself. Every member here, sitting in this panel, their companies have joined the First Movers Coalition. Because you heard the word demand mentioned, and it is a critical component of leading people to the water and getting them to drink, so to speak. If you create the demand, things are going to start to ramp up much, much faster. If you sit and wait for someone to just casually make the decision that they're going to purchase something or do something, there's barely a ripple. But if you can get more people joining into a First Movers Coalition and putting the pressure on their cohorts, then you begin to do the things we need to accelerate. Here's one of the real important factoids regarding shipping to think about. If shipping were a country, it is the 8th largest emitter on the planet. So we can't do this without shipping moving. 8th largest emitter of the 20 countries I just talked about. So you have to begin to move to make this transition happen. And that means, frankly, changing the way corporations have thought and done business. There's too much business as usual, folks. It really just, it's shocking to me that after all of the evidence of what is happening, we are still struggling to move forward in some of these sectors. So these guys are heroic in what they've decided to do. They're going to pay a premium up front to make it happen. What Bill Gates in his books calls the green premium. They're going to pay it. And that'll filter down. Volvo, which has joined the First Mover Coalition, has pledged that 10% of the steel they buy is going to be green steel. And there are buyers for that. Maersk has made an announcement that of the next 8 ships they build, all 8 are going to be zero carbon. That's the way we need to move here. And these folks up here, as I say, are setting the example and moving us in that direction. On, I forget which day it is. I know it's Monday, but I forget which day is happening this week. We are having a First Mover Coalition. We have a meeting this afternoon, but we have an announcement that Bill Gates and I will be joining together with other members to announce a very significant increase in the number of major corporations participating in the First Mover Coalition. So that's number one. We've seen some great announcements beginning. The second thing we need to ask people to think about is the Green Shipping Challenge. When I was in Norway recently, Svein and others joined in agreeing that we're going to create this challenge as we head towards Sharm. Sharm, as you all know, is not a decision COP. I think it's important for people to begin focusing on it. It's not like Glasgow, where there was a major step forward we had to make, but there are critical components of Sharm, which we are calling implementation plus. Implementation of all the promises made in Glasgow, and plus is bringing those people to the table in that 35% who need to ramp up with their NDCs or with their individual commitments to make things happen. So with respect to the Green Shipping Challenge, many countries focused on the Clydebank Declaration, which Johannah mentioned, the Declaration on Zero Emission Shipping by 2050. But there's now an opportunity to build on this so we can ensure that the zero emissions pledge with respect to shipping is really underway. Right now, shipping has grown in its emissions over the last couple of years. It is not, therefore, obviously, on its face, not moving towards the trajectory that we have to get to. And so if we're going to get to zero shipping, or we're going to have green fuel by 2030, we have to move much faster than we are today. And we got to wrestle these alligators to the ground. As Andrew said, kick them in the tile. I got to learn. I love the way you guys say that. We'd say tail, but he says tile. It has the same effect. So, my friends, this is really getting serious time. You look at the evidence around the planet. There's an upside. Fatih Birol and the IEA made it clear that if all the pledges of Glasgow are kept, we would be at 1.8 degrees increase by 2050. When I heard that, I really said, whoa, I didn't know that everything we were doing here in Glasgow could really get us below 2. But it does. But not now. Not unless we turn this around. So I ask everybody to think about that. I ask you to confront other people here over these next several days. The world has to pick up the pace very significantly. But shipping has got to be part of this, and it's going to have to happen by creating the demand and moving rapidly, setting the standard that about green hydrogen and hydrogen. We can't operate in a world where everybody's operating by different ideas about what meets the goal here. We have to have a full understanding on it, and obviously moving towards pricing some of these things in a realistic way. So thank you, panel, for all of your individual efforts. You're fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you very much. Do you want to stay for 1 or 2 questions? Do you have time for that? Yeah? Yes. Someone says yes. Excellent. I want to give the opportunity to the audience, but I also like to give the opportunity to anyone on the panel who would wish to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Sure. Constance Hunter. I'm the Global Head of Strategy and ESG at the insurer AIG. And I guess what I want to ask about is the progress on carbon pricing, because to me this is the missing link. And this combines with the immense power of the fossil fuel industry globally, but especially in the US. So I guess I'd like to throw out one policy question and then a question generally to the panel about carbon pricing. It seems to me that the technology exists to do carbon capture at source, but the motivation is lacking for many fossil fuel companies in the US. So if we were to do a public-private partnership like we did for the vaccines, where we say to the fossil fuel companies, if you implement this technology under these specifications by this time frame, we will purchase from you your carbon rights, and we could start setting a carbon price within the United States, because it just doesn't seem we're going to get there on a carbon tax. So I just wonder if you're starting to think about alternative solutions, and then globally, what is the prospects for a global carbon tax?
Well, all of the modeling, all of it, shows that the single biggest reduction you get in emissions and the single greatest reduction in temperature comes with a carbon price. And obviously, that presumption, if you go to the MIT model called En-ROADS, you can plug in your own assumptions, and it's a really useful tool. Because as you plug in an assumption about nuclear or electric vehicles, or whatever the assumption is, you can begin to see that line move, and the biggest movement comes from carbon pricing. Just a disclaimer up front, the Biden administration has not yet resolved exactly what the pace of its approach is going to be. There's an analysis that's been taking place. The president's asked us to take a hard look at that. On a personal level, I advocated for it, and I have advocated for it long before I took on the job of envoy. I think if we could have a global carbon price, personally, it would make a profound impact, but there are obviously hurdles to get over in the doing of that. In the meantime, I think that we are seeing a greater movement around the world to seriously consider the carbon border adjustment component. The Congress is looking at that very seriously right now. Chris Coons, Senator Coons, others have a plan for that. The President has also asked us to analyze that as deeply as you can because it has great trade implications, and carbon leakage is obviously a tricky thing to deal with. But you know, we gotta give people the incentive to do what they're not willing to do right now, clearly. And incentives do work. There are all kinds of incentives. Production tax credit, investment tax credit, various kinds of ways you have policy decisions. And the government has to make key policy decisions here in order to accelerate this. Just has to, all around the world. I want to note one thing that I think is important for us, though. Most of the owners, most of the countries that flag these ships, the owners, not the flags, the owners, they get flagged in less developed countries, but the owners are in developed countries. And most of the goods being carried on these ships are going to and from developed countries. You have to remember that. That's got to be front and center as you think about a responsibility to make these choices. And so, you know, I think this is going to be a year of real hard decision-making and confrontation on this question of carbon itself, because we're reaching, according to the science, can I emphasize this, folks? Everything we're talking about doing, we're not talking about doing it because they can see that automatically on the bottom line today, this is going to improve their shareholder status. No. We're doing this, everybody here, and most of the people in the world who are taking this seriously, because as a matter of mathematics and physics, we are being dictated to by facts. And people need to really focus on that. There's not a matter of, you know, policy decision or ideology or politics or liberal, conservative, or up or down or whatever. This is about science and doing the things we need to do to avoid far worse consequences. The risk, I mean, we have to deal with risk-taking, yes. And I think there'll be new ideas we'll talk about here in the next days about how to have blended finance. There's a lot of work going into that. But that does not make up for the responsibility to recognize the science and take steps individually. And pricing carbon ultimately may well be one of the keys.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for raising this important issue of how we put in place the right mechanisms to support the transition at the kind of speed that we need. Is there anybody from the panel who would like to ask Secretary Kerry a question? Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. A few years ago, many would remember that we couldn't pass an act, we couldn't even get an agreement on what slavery was. We knew that slavery was rising in the world, but we couldn't do anything about it. And when you spoke to governments, when you spoke to civil society, when you spoke to public companies, they couldn't agree what the hell it was. Once we all settled an agreement that the term which would capture forced marriage, child slavery, bonded labour, inherited debt, the whole blanket was called modern slavery, then the entire world started to move against it. The definition was everything, enabling us now with confidence to see the beginning of the end of slavery as one of the worst traditions of humanity. Do you think, Secretary Kerry, that finally having a definition for green hydrogen means we can all gather around it, we can bank it, we can finance it, we can trade it, we can globalise it? What do you actually think, Secretary?
Well, I think it organizes investment strategy. It gives meaning to, it addresses risk in its own way. And it closes a loophole in the marketplace so that people will have a much easier time making a decision to join, to take part in this. I mean, remember, Amazon has decided not just by 2030 they're going to have a 10% But by 2040, they're going to be 100%
That's my point.
reduced. But you've got to be able to, the lenders, other people in the marketplace still are, slow to be willing to take on some of the risk. And the greatest risk is, in fact, not doing these things. Far greater risk. You want to risk to investment money all around the world, keep doing what we're doing, which is not enough. So the faster we move, and that's going to help us move faster.
Yeah, we're out of time, unfortunately, Svein Tore, but we'll get it. Do you want to?
Really fast.
Super quick. On just your thoughts on contracts for difference, because it's great everything that is happening now in the hydrogen space and bringing the cost down, but we need to get started now and get the first movers to start to build the infrastructure and so on. And today the price point is higher than where it needs to be in the future. But if everyone waits until we get to that price point, it's going to be too late. And look at what happened in the solar industry, wind power, and so on. So how could we create this enabling environment to get moving today?
Get more people to join the First Movers Coalition.
Good.
Thank you.
Right.
I wish they were all as easy.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing everything you're doing to keep this high on the agenda. Thank you also to Svein Tore for bringing up the notion of contracts for difference and other mechanisms. I don't know if you wish to expand a little bit on that, because I think it's a really relevant point on some of the mechanisms that could be put in place in the short term.
Yeah, because this is something that I'm really concerned about and passionate about as well, because we need to get going now. Yara is not a startup company. We've been doing this for 120 years. We're producing ammonia today. We have a project that will be ready to deliver green ammonia next year. But if everyone is waiting until we get these very low numbers on the hydrogen, there's not going to be any contracts to meet these expansions. So if you think about this jointly, sharing the risk, creating contracts for difference, looking whole value chains, this is doable. But then we need to move now in order to do full-scale conversion of our largest plant. If I have everything in place now, maybe we'll be ready 3 to 4 years from now, realistically. And we have to be realistic about how long time it takes. But that's what we need to commit to. And we need to commit to that now. We're in 2022, plus 4 years. 26, we're getting pretty close to 2030.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, John Kerry left just before we got a chance to say this, but the First Movers Coalition, I can tell you, I'm going to make a big deal out of this. There is a serious first mover disadvantage which exists across the world in green hydrogen. It's capital intensive, it's technology intensive, it's labor intensive. Once it's rolling, it's absolutely fantastic, but everyone is hanging back, waiting for someone else to crack it, someone else to spend the really big capital, which they can then come in and improve on. What Contracts for Difference does, it removes that massive disincentive. And I think probably the best model out there is the cleanest and the simplest is the Biden tax credit, a $3 payment for every kilo of green hydrogen which is produced and sold. That, I can assure you, will start a boom in North America. Canada's lobbied me to lobby Manchin and Biden to make sure it's continent-wide, Canada and North America. You need something like that which incentivizes people to get in first, spend the hard dollars first, and that will start the land rush of green hydrogen, which is essential. It is the only fuel which will actually bring global warming to an end. I love the part about CCS, and maybe we can capture the carbon, but look, as a scientist, I can tell you, and as a statistician, if it fails 19 out of 20 times and still leaks in the 1 out of 20 times, then it makes a great soundbite at Davos, but it's no good for the environment. And it makes a great pitch to bankers, but it's no good for the environment. If you're going to go green, use blue or grey just to get into the industry, but don't sell it as clean, because it's not. And the scientists and statisticians will hold you up.
Thank you, Andrew. I think one of the things that you're pointing at as well is this sort of notion of the risk that we face and especially in this early phase of the transition. I guess I'd like to also just get a chance to highlight some of the other barriers that we need to address collectively. Hashimoto-san, I know you've certainly investigated into some of that as well. What do you see as some of the bottlenecks to making these decisions, even in the face of the difficulties that you're seeing?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, to me, that the most important bottleneck we have to sort out is that volume issue. That if you look at that, the size of the shipping industry, just only MOL group that we are using about 4 or 5 million tons of oil every year. So that all over the world, the shipping industry as a whole will require several 100 million tons of oil, which is a huge volume. And then as of today, that we do not have enough confidence that that we can get the enough volume of ammonia. And on top of that, we recognize that the power generation sector, they also are considering to use the ammonia. Perhaps it's a kind of the replacement of the coal burning the power station. So that how to get the long-term perspective that we can get the adequate volume in time. That is quite the big driver for us to start a massive investment. That is as of today, it's a quite big challenge.
Thank you. Jeremy, you elegantly avoided my question from before, which was the role that you have as a charter of a very large fleet of vessels globally. How do you see your ability to leverage that role as sharing some of the risks that we're talking about?
Okay. I mean, one of the things we have done is, we've been one of the leaders in joining the Sea Cargo Charter. That's very important for transparency. People need to understand what their carbon footprint is. They need to understand what their emissions are, and therefore need to be able to report those. And I think it's the first report on this is actually due to be published next month. So therefore, this is a stepping stone in terms of what are we actually emitting, who's emitting, how are we emitting. Okay. So for example, I think that's extremely important to at least have a benchmark out there, and then we can start to sort of address some of the problems. For other parts of the issues that we're trying to address, along like Yara, a bunkering business, we're moving towards how do we start to bunker ammonia around the world? And where can you produce it? It's as Andrew was saying, great incentives to have production facilities in the States. We need them globally to be able to be very efficient to ensure, because the transportation of ammonia, it can be done, obviously, because we've got the technology through LPG, but ammonia is being transported now. But we don't want to rely on single production centres around the world. It needs to be a global situation. So.
Thank you. And perhaps if I can just use this opportunity to just get either Svein or Andrew to speak briefly about the global availability of some of these fuels in the future. Svein, maybe you want to come in on that.
I can start, and that's what's so interesting about ammonia is that the infrastructure is already built over decades to serve the fertilizer markets in particular. So, I mean, for our company alone, we have 17 production units of ammonia. We have 18 ammonia terminals. We have 11 ships carrying ammonia across the world every day, and we're already the biggest trader of ammonia globally. So the infrastructure is there already, so we can build on that. Obviously, as shipping moves into it, it needs to be brought to much more scale, but then how do we get started? And I think it's very well illustrated by Hashimoto-san and what their concern on if they convert, will there be volume to serve it? And then from our side, if we produce the product, will there be a market to take it? And that's really where we need to find a solution, and also where governments and regulators need to come in to create that enabling environment, because as Andrew pointed out, there's a huge first mover disadvantage in this industry, but we need to get started and someone needs to take that, and why not in this panel and through the First Movers Coalition.
Thank you so much, Centaur. Before we round out, we do have time for another couple of questions from the audience. If there's anybody who has questions. You in the middle. Yes, yep. You're the first hand to shoot up.
Thank you very much. Extremely interesting discussions. Harald Hansen from DNB, one of the largest shipping banks in the world. Going back to your question, Mr. Hashimoto, on the availability, would small-scale carbon capture be a technical alternative as well for decarbonization? Thank you.
Hashimoto-san, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, actually, the carbon capture technology, we also have a lot of expectation, and so the good point is that we can maintain that the existing facilities, which will minimize the required capital investment for coming 10 to 20 years. So definitely, I have quite keen interest to see that the carbon capture technology. Still, our technical guys have some reservation about the commercial viability. To be honest, therefore, it's a reason why we want to keep quite many options open for the time being, and try to develop the various the alternative ways at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was another hand that shot up. There you are. Thank you. Please introduce yourself as you ask your question.
Hi, my name's David Wallerstein with Tencent. Hi. To what extent is the powertrain problem around using ammonia and using it very efficiently to drive ships around the world, has that been solved, or is this an area where there's actually a lack of innovation, evolution, and is the technology where it needs to be? And if it's not, what's the role of the venture market perhaps to help accelerate? The venture market does this kind of first mover disadvantage problem really well. We usually get shares in companies, and then when things go well, you capture that advantage through your shareholding. But how's that coming along?
Andrew, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, look, I think there's enormous scope for venture capital to get into this sector. The miracle molecule green hydrogen needs a great deal of capital, but all I can say is that the opportunities, I've spoken to you about a few of them, but there are so many out there. And the world does need to appreciate that even if carbon capture and storage worked, and it occasionally works, statistically 1 in 20 times it works, there's no answer for it once it's burnt. I mean, if you looked at the trail coming out of ships, my own ships, what's that black streak? Well, that's carbon, Mr. Forrest, says the chief engineer. What's the exhaust coming out of your car? Well, that's carbon. That's not getting captured. So when we talk about carbon capture and storage, we're just completely forgetting that while it isn't true remotely you can rely on it to resist climate change, global warming, even if it worked at the oil refinery, what we know, there's no plan for it once it's burnt by the consumer. So that's why we have to move along. If you burn green hydrogen, it produces water, and you don't have to carbon sequester anything. There's massive venture capital opportunities in that.
Thank you. Svein, you had your hand up as well.
I just wanted to add on, when it comes to engine technology itself, there's a lot of development happening now with Wärtsilä, MAN, amongst others, in order to create efficient engines to run on green ammonia as well. And then it's also about the security aspect of using ammonia on a ship and the security protocols and so on. To that, I would like to say that we are already transporting ammonia across the world. Today we have 11 ships. There are ways to measure it, but we cannot forget the fact that there are some of the properties of ammonia that makes it a bit more challenging. It's toxic, and then it needs to be handled accordingly. But there's a rapid development in that, and ship owners are getting more and more comfortable on their ability to manage that as we get to 2024 and 2025.
Thank you so much, Svein. We are almost out of time. I do want to give each panelist, if you have any additional things that you want to leave the audience with at this stage. Maybe one by one, just very briefly. We have a few minutes left.
Let me just say that I really applaud Japan. I really applaud Korea. The Asian countries are moving really quickly on this. You've got Toyota, you've got Hyundai. They're not falling for the electrify everything lie. They're saying actually you can electrify some things, but if you want to stop global warming, you're going to have a hydrogen which is completely green. And I just want to applaud the Asian countries for helping lead this thinking.
I couldn't agree more. Hashimoto-san.
Okay, one of alternatives we are quite seriously trying as of today is that to utilize wind power to reduce the energy consumption. Of course, that wind power itself cannot be the main engine of the huge vessels, but it will certainly enhance the efficiency, and we can achieve 5%, 10% reduction of the emission relatively easily by installing the wind power products on board. That is one of the challenges that we are trying to materialize as of today.
Thank you. Svein.
Yeah, just let's get this done quickly. Let's get started today. There's such an urgency. We heard it from Secretary Kerry as well. The gravity of the situation. It puts it on all of us to move now from ambitions in 2050 or 2040 to really getting into contracts today. Not only ambitions and memorandums of understanding, but real contracts that can get this going. We've taken the first step. We're ready to make another massive step, but for that we need partners. We're opening up for that, and then there also needs to be a massive construction of renewable energy to support the production of this. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think shipping is everyone's problem, but no one's problem because there's no single government responsible for shipping. Yet everyone depends on the global industry, functioning properly. We're all trying to do our bit, but I really do think we've got to collaborate around the world. It's great to see, as Andrew said, Japan and South Korea making some great initiatives. We need the IMO to make some really strong statements and some strong direction in terms of the decarbonisation. That really can create a level playing field and really accelerate the process.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you for rounding us out with that. I think what I'm hearing across the board is that we need to do everything, everywhere, all at once, to quote a current movie. And I hope that you will take this opportunity, both those on the stage today, but also you in the audience, to bring these messages to every conversation that you're having. I think Secretary Kerry made a really good point about we need to be having this conversation with everyone that we meet along the way, that we need to advocate for a transition that needs to happen urgently, and we all play a role in putting together, taking a slice off of the risk, taking the slice off of the cost, so that collectively we can do this. I want to thank Yara for hosting, to the World Economic Forum for partnering on this session, to our speakers, not only for sharing your thoughts and your insights on shipping's decarbonization and how we accelerate it, but particularly for leading the way on shipping decarbonization and encouraging others to join us. Thank you.